Hi, Rene. Welcome to the Makers Marketing Mastermind, and thanks for being one of the early guests on it.
Hi, Elliot. Really appreciate you inviting me along and having this conversation today.
Of course. So I think, we've agreed really to cover the topic of trade shows within this mastermind, which I think is a really valuable one in terms of the marketing strategy, not just during, but before and the lead up as well as after. It would be great before we kind of get stuck into the topic to get an understanding of your background and how you've come to where you are today within the manufacturing marketing landscape.
Okay, great. I'll give you a very, very quick summary. So I've been doing it for 30 years. I know I don't look it, but I started out in post-graduation in 95, pre-digital. Trade shows, very, very important. I started out actually in the safety equipment and personal protective market. So everything from helmets, goggles, visors, breathing apparatus, anything for people working in hazardous environments around the world. So I worked with, some of the biggest manufacturers in the UK that then were acquired by various American companies and have now become part, I think, of Scott International, which is a big US company, part of Tyco. So that was first 4 or 5 years. Like I said, a lot of advertising, distributor support, exhibitions were the mainstay. And then obviously digital came in and we started doing website, email and all the other good stuff. From there, I then spent about 10 years in medcoms and pharmaceuticals. So it was some of the biggest pharmaceuticals in the world. Again, very, very event driven, a lot of conferences and presentation of data and events within events, which is very much what trade shows and exhibitions are all about. And then went agency side and did about probably another 5 to 8 years working particularly in industrial B2B. So that's where I worked with people like Tyco and Pentair on valves and controls and actuation and automation solutions. I did a lot of work with David Brown Gears in Huddersfield, who, as well as putting the DB and Aston Martin DB, because they're all about the engines and the gearboxes, actually did some huge stuff for military, defence, aviation, mining, minerals, all these other sectors, and lots of other companies in between. So very, very blue collar, very industrial experience. Went out on my own 10 years ago this year, working with probably smaller businesses than I'd previously had exposure to within clients, working in the probably 2 to 20 million pound space, family owned, independent manufacturing, engineering, construction businesses. Again, helping them from an outsourced perspective. I think the buzzword these days is fractional. So providing a marketing department function, but obviously outsourced from externally. So that's everything from, marketing strategy to websites, content, and all points in between. So I spend about 90% of my time writing and producing stuff to appear in 101 different ways. And I know you do similar work as well. So for me at the minute, the expo side of things and helping businesses who are spending money on expos is a really good space for me to be in. There are, in the sectors that I'm active in, when I think about metals and plastics and chemicals and manufacturing, there are mainstay events every year in the UK alone before we even look internationally. A lot of them in the Birmingham NEC, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of exhibitors there. So a lot of companies that, if I'm honest, having walked the floor for numerous years, need a lot of help. Trade shows are really expensive, and from the obvious costs of the space, the display items or the print or the giveaways, to the less tangible stuff like the hotels and the expenses and the staff time out of role and on the road, the costs can quickly scale. So I think, if we can help manufacturing businesses, people in the community here and further afield, to really get the most from what they're doing at trade shows and see a return, then that's going to be, time well spent.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that you make in terms of trade shows being so expensive, and especially for marketing budgets within manufacturing, often will take up the vast majority of it. So that's why I feel like this topic is so important because of that fact, which kind of leads nicely then into the first opening question on this topic, which is a bit of a backwards question because it's starting really from the mistakes that you see. So because it's obviously such a critical part of marketing within this industry, it's important to avoid some of these common mistakes. What do you see as the biggest mistake manufacturing companies make when preparing for trade shows, and what should they be doing instead?
I think because we're probably looking at two ends of a spectrum, we're looking at probably SME manufacturers who will probably take a shell scheme, they'll probably take a load of display units, they'll clutter up the stand with a whole load of stuff, won't necessarily have a strong proposition because they're typically doing loads of things for loads of different customers. And if you want a valve or a screw or a widget, we can do it in any number of sizes, in any colour, and da 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 da. So you've got on the one hand those smaller SMEs that are doing that kitchen sink job of throwing it all out without too much structure to what they're doing. Conversely, at the larger end in manufacturing and engineering, where you have the much bigger companies, they, if anything, can be sometimes too vague in the sense of, you might find that they're positioning themselves, as total efficient, streamlined industrial solutions, but it doesn't really mean anything to anyone. So they go the other way. So you either have companies that are either too vague and not clear about what they're doing and what they're offering, or companies that are just throwing everything. So I think the common sort of factor there is that there isn't often a singular proposition to what they're doing at a show. And ultimately that comes down to kind of branding and positioning and having a bit of thinking about, if we were going to put 4 or 5 words up on a panel or on a 10-meter wall, what would they be, so that if anybody could see that from 30 or 40 feet through a throng of people, they would get it, and then they know whether they want to come over and have a conversation about that or not. So a lot of companies don't quite get that right. I think digging into that a little bit deeper, a couple of other mistakes that companies might make in this space: not having that compelling reason to visit or engage with that stand, with that organisation. And I'm sure, as we'll come to talk I talk a lot about either the new or the exclusive. And these are the things that are going to get attention and get interest. And I think linked to that, again, when you drill a little bit deeper, I think most companies are probably a little bit guilty of leaning on the organisers to deliver the crowd, to deliver the audience. I don't think a lot of the manufacturers, particularly in the SME side of things, they'll book their space, they'll create their pop-ups and panels, they might take a screen along, they might take some kit along to demo, but they don't really do an awful lot of, outbound push on, come and see us at this show because there's this new or exclusive thing happening. So yeah, I try and work with companies is to try and give them that thing that they can run a campaign on right up to the show and out the other side. So I think they're probably, the big 3 or 4 things that I think manufacturers tend to get wrong in this area.
I think that last point is really important in terms of seeing it as a campaign as opposed to a standalone event, and kind of almost setting up on the day and hoping that your big customers will walk past the stand. When it comes to a pre-event strategy, if we're talking, for an SME that is, it's one of their biggest trade shows of the year, how can marketing teams build momentum and drive traffic to their booth before the show even begins?
It's a really good area, as we've just alluded to. It's not an area that I think a lot of companies give enough thought to. And I think it comes back down to really understanding why that audience is going to that show in the first place. And I think if you were to prioritize the reasons for people taking a day out of their exceptionally busy work life, and particularly if they are more senior and maybe in a position to make some decisions related to, buying and procurement and kind of switching providers and all of that stuff, most of the people at a trade show, I would guess, are not actually there to buy stuff. They are there for any number of other reasons. They're there to network. They might be there to learn. They might be there seeking inspiration. They might know they've got some kind of supply problem, but they've not yet moved towards resolving it. They're just going and having a little bit of a look and a research and maybe shortlist. So I think there's a very small percentage of people at any given manufacturing trade show that are actually ready to buy. Problem you have, though, is that everybody there on the exhibition stands is in absolute selling mode. And often the teams on the trade show stands are salespeople off the road. So they want to start having sales conversations straight away, don't they? So I think if you appreciate where the majority of the audience is at and where you're meeting them, it starts to have quite a big impact on how you present, what you're offering, what you're sharing, and how to start some of those conversations from admittedly quite a cold place. So by doing that early in the process and starting to infuse that into your marketing campaign running up to the show and building it around what I call kind of micro events within the event, micro experiences, there's a number of things that you could do at the show to drive attention and drive interest, but you'll actually need to do the work on them in the weeks and the months leading up to the show. But the key thing is this idea of new, exclusive, because it plays on that kind of human, condition of kind of FOMO and fear of missing out. And if you're pushing something new or exclusive at this show, at this 2-day or 3-day pop-up, that people aren't going to be able to get anywhere else, people are saying, well, I'm going to go to that show and they're one of the companies I want to go and see. I want to see this thing. I want to learn about what they're doing. So that new and exclusive thing, I think, becomes quite important.
Yeah, I really like the idea of that. My question then would be, when you're looking at a strategy, both pre-event to try and get people to your booth, as well as during the event, are there some typical examples of that new and exclusive that are kind of good go-tos that you see?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, and all of this depends on budget and all of these good things, and space, how much space you have and how much budget you've got. I would normally say to get people to a stand who are either, decision makers or influencers, the media press, the organisers with the video guy and the camera to do interviews and things, you do need to be offering something new. Now, if that's a product, it can be, if you're a service-based business, it can be a new service. If there's any way to show that, demonstrate that, bring that to life, but definitely something product service related, really, really important. Perhaps having access to one of your senior people and doing, a short meet the experts at allotted times. Again, if the space you have allows for that and you're not competing with the, main conference agenda and things, some exhibition organisers can frown upon doing that sort of thing because they'll see you taking footfall away from, ironically from the seminars and things, even though you've actually paid to be there. You just got to play the game and play within the rules. But if you can do, some meet the expert stuff that talks about known problems on the stand and ways that you're meeting and addressing that in that informative Q&A way, that could be quite an effective thing. Demonstrations are always great. So again, if you've got the money and the budget to create an AR or a VR or some kind of AI, headset related thing, that people can kind of put it on and go through a walkthrough of what product usage looks like or whatever it is, or put them in a situation, a factory, and they're having to kind of, put automators and actuators on top of different, units and things. There's loads of creative ways to do that. I think construction and architectural use these sorts of tools quite well in terms of modelling, buildings and, future developments and things like that. I think manufacturers could learn a lot from that. That could be a good thing to do. And you typically find if you've got something really cool from an AR, VR, perspective, people will queue around the block to get a go on that. So that could be quite an interesting thing. People get people when it's trade shows. An empty stand, people are going to swerve it. But if there's a busy stand, there's a buzz, there's a bit of a hive of activity going on there, then I think, that could be a good thing. So it doesn't have to be, win a Lego box or a technical Lego box or win an iPad, some of that stuff, which doesn't really attract the right people. You'll get plenty of business cards and plenty of badge scans, but they're not necessarily going to be the people you want. I think stay on message and build experiences around that kind of new and exclusive. They're probably more at the expensive level. At the lower level down for some of our SME manufacturers, we might think about benchmark scorecards where people can come along, tap a few yes nos on a screen and get a score. Humans love to know how well they're doing and get a score out of 100 and some recommendations on that, which could then be followed up after the event. So really easy for manufacturers to ask some fairly loaded questions around their current supply, give people a terrible score, you're not buying very well, you have your long lead times, and then there's a way to follow up more effectively. Or in the run up to a show, survey your customers and issue that as some kind of exclusive report that you can preview and present the highlights from at the event in a kind of small forum. So there's a number of different ways that I think you can do new and exclusive. It doesn't always have to be product innovation or service innovation. You've got to be, clever and creative around, what as a group of, educated people, and how you can bring that to help and support and service, the wider community around you. I think that's the mindset to take into these things.
Yeah, I really like some of those ideas, especially, as well as because sometimes you can look at some best practices or examples, and it's for enterprise level companies that are able to really invest in their trade show presence.
Yeah.
But the idea of benchmarking for SMEs, I think, is a great one, and also relating it back to kind of human psychology. There's a few elements in there you said about herd mentality, going to like the busy stand, as well as like people loving to know a score that they've got for X, Y, or Z. I think
it's all about just kind of stirring that pot. So you're giving, in theory, you're giving something of value in terms of commitment from the person who's answering the questions. It's quite quick and easy and relatively disposable, but they'll get that number and they'll get, a kind of some recommendations based on how they've answered. So it might actually cast some doubt on, where they're currently buying from and the products and services that they're currently procuring, that then leads to a conversation to find out more. So that's quite effective at, at hitting those people, that big percentage of people at a show that probably don't necessarily realise they're not buying optimally at the minute. Or even if they are, it's not become a problem yet because it hasn't been presented as a problem to them. So and there's some really good technologies around that help do that. Daniel Priestley does a thing called Score App, which can be integrated with websites. It can be integrated, you can run QR codes off it. You can run it on iPads at shows and big touch screens and all that kind of thing. So there's a few other softwares that do a similar sort of thing and allow you to do really effective, targeted follow-up off the back of that. So that's a good kind of low-cost entry way into having some kind of desirable lead magnet on an exhibition stand.
It leads nicely on to the next question then, really, which is, assuming you've executed your pre-event strategy, you've got some, your ideal customers coming to your booth, and you have some form of new enticing way of attracting people in the show onto your booth. How do you recommend aligning marketing and sales teams on site to make the most of those in-person interactions? So that could be during the show, but also after the show.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point, because often marketing and sales are not terribly well aligned at the best of times in manufacturing businesses. Marketing can sometimes be seen as the colouring in department by grizzled old road-based sales guys. But we know that trade show teams, even the SMEs, they will probably take along an owner, founder, or an MD. There'll be a marketing person there, probably junior, maybe as a marketing assistant, marketing manager level, and then some sales guys, guys and girls, ladies sell as well, along, and they're normally a bit more experienced. So in an SME, you probably find the marketing person maybe, what's the right word? Probably not quite having the same level of voice in some of those conversations. Very different in the larger enterprises, because it will be led by, a head of marketing, a real strong brand owner, you would hope. So again, we're always thinking about, the two different levels of exhibitor here. But there's going to be a mixed team on site for sure, with different objectives. Some of them are playing the long game, some of them are playing the short game. Looking for those quick sales, those quick wins, the ability to turn things around and it to hit a sales target probably more quickly than maybe, say, marketing, who are thinking about brand and thinking about lead gen and nurture, and then the owner and the MD thinking about, reputation and network and all that good stuff. So you've got a team there that is coming at it from different perspectives. So naturally, the obvious thing to do is to set some objectives and KPIs for the show, agree what the focus is, and make sure everybody's well briefed on that. And again, I would think most companies don't do this. They probably don't. They probably on a very tactical level will agree how we're going to capture leads. So are we handwriting forms and stapling business cards? Are we paying for the scanning software? Are we using our own software? But outside of that, probably not as much focus on this. And I think it's really, really important that your team is well briefed on what your focus at the show is. How do we want to capture information and who's doing that? You might have facilities on your stand, which is you might have a private meeting space. How do we book that room? Who has access to the room booking? If we're having Q&As with one of our senior people and we've only got 6 seats, how are we booking and managing all of that? People want to have a conversation with one of our senior people. How do we manage these sorts of things? So there's actually quite a lot potentially to manage in terms of the stand and the online, bringing marketing and sales together. So I think the key thing is a pre-event briefing that covers as much of that off as possible. And then every morning, whether it's at breakfast or it's on the stand, 30 minutes before the show opens, this is what happened yesterday, pros, cons, this is what we're doing today. Remember, guys, the focus is on this, that, and the other, and making sure that we're getting the best possible outcomes. What I'd also say is, and this is often overlooked, I think it's important to network the room. So within that team of people you've got, everybody's going to want a little bit of time to wander around and talk to other exhibitors, attend some seminars, talk to some speakers, and all the rest of it. So we've got to make sure that we cover that off and we're doing the right things. We're doing our competitor monitoring, but the key thing is we're trying to always think about how we can send traffic back to our stand. So things like sitting in a seminar about a related topic, asking a question, and maybe just making sure you say, oh, I'm Rene and I'm from, Chemie Pipes Inc. We're over on stand 46. We're doing this and that and the other, and we're offering this today. But my question is X. Just getting those little opportunities to just drop those seeds everywhere you can in every possible interaction. So I think, there's roles and responsibility stuff on the stand, and then there's the etiquette and how that works within the whole room of the show as well. But people need to be aligned and working to the same brief and capturing the detail and the data in the same way.
Assuming then that you're aligned during the show, after the show ends, I guess it's also part of the same question because it is collaboration between sales and marketing. What to you is an effective post-event follow-up process?
I mean, I think ideally the team quickly reviews what's been captured that day, and we can agree fairly quickly what is red hot and can justifiably go straight to sales or straight to the person that had that conversation to follow that up, or if there's some kind of marketing nurture. In the main, you'd probably want to have that prepared in advance, and you're looking at 24 to 48 hours to get back in touch with people. I did a LinkedIn Live that kind of talked about a lot of this, and the recordings on my profile, and the consensus and the people in the room was respond as quickly as you can. If you think I'm going to wait till the end of the show for people to get back, or I'm going to wait till next week because everybody's going to hit them, in the next 3 or 4 days. I think the point is if you've had a really good conversation and there's some interest there, however, 1%, 99%, jump on it quickly. That's the whole point of the show. So if you've got things set up in advance, there's great email technology like, the MailChimps and the Dot Digitals and the MailerLites and the HubSpot, where you can set up workflows, you can write the emails, you can schedule and sequence them, you can add fields in so that it can take a line from an Excel or a CSV and drop it straight in, so you can personalize every email out so people get responded to quickly and you're getting the right information in front of people. If you want to really stand out, decide, personalize that and decide, is it coming from the person that they spoke to, or is it coming from sales and or marketing? Always a person though. And to really stand out, have some lumpy mail ready, have some DM, direct mail ready, not necessarily brochures and the usual stuff, but maybe have a printed buyer's guide ready, 24-page, nicely finished piece that talks about, some of the problems that buyers and specifiers and users in your industry have, and then start to talk about them and present some of those solutions. So at least they're getting something of value through, and then you can get the follow-up emails and all of that stuff going out. So got to really think about it, but make sure that it's aligned to, what's happening day 1, day 2, day 3 of the show, and who's involved and who's going to front some of that up. So again, it's all stuff that needs thinking about beforehand. I think too many companies will just take all the cards home. They'll take a week or two and then they'll farm them out to whoever's covering that region. And by the time they get in touch with the person and say, oh, hi, I'm the business development manager for, Acme Gases in the Midlands. You visited our stand 3 weeks ago and I think you were interested in this, can we have a chat? They'll be like, who are you? What are you talking about? So I think the generic stuff does not work. We need to be a little bit more, focused and personalised and a little bit more fluid and just a bit quicker. I think quicker stands out more than anything. Doesn't always have to look the best. Doesn't have to be really well branded. I think the key thing is being first. Really, really important because it shows how keen you are.
Yeah, I like that in terms of the speed being the absolute priority, and also the direct mail element for even, a junior marketer that might have most of those leads being contacted by the sales team. Direct mail, it's amazing the effect it can have if it's just accompanied by a personalized compliment slip by the sales manager or whoever it is, to add that kind of personal touch and keep that brand awareness going, really solidify that after the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then if you're talking tens, not hundreds, you could even, print a comp slip with a QR code on it. They zap the comp slip and it takes them to a private video on YouTube that says, oh, hi, Roger, really enjoyed, chatting to you at the thing. Hopefully you've got the buyer's guide there. I'd love to invite you to a demo or a webinar. Just click this link and we can connect on email. So just little touches. A bit harder to do if you're dealing in the hundreds of leads, but certainly I'd be surprised. Certainly in the area I work in, the kind of 2 to 20 mil, you're probably talking less than 100 leads, good leads from a show. Probably a lot less. The enterprise, companies obviously potentially a lot bigger, but then they'll also have a lot of, tire kickers and graduates and all kinds of other people in there as well to manage. So again, just thinking about how to stand out, standing out in the follow up, by being first and being creative and being customer focused and not just saying you're customer centric, but actually delivering on it. It's a great first impression.
Can you share a story or a case study at all where a manufacturing business has taken some of these best practices that we've talked about pre, during and post trade show and really improved their approach?
Yeah, I mean, I worked for a long time with an Australian packaging company. They manufacture what we call vertical form fill and seal machines. So they typically go into places like Walker's, PepsiCo. So it's bagged snacks, crisps, sweets, confectionery, that kind of thing. A lot of machinery in there, and these bits of equipment probably going for about 100 grand a pop. So it's a gestational. It's got a gestational period in terms of selling these things to, Walker's, Seabrooks, PepsiCo, KP, all the sort of snack-based companies and whatever. So we very effectively, with the head of marketing on the client side, put together new product launches, tailored demonstrations for press and for priority customers and prospects at the show. We did the Interpack show in Germany, 6-day show. It's enormous, and about 18 halls. It's huge. Bosch have a hall all to themselves. It's that big a show. So by having a dedicated product focus launch, the whole new thing, the whole experience thing, you could come and see this thing. Absolutely enormous. Things working and moving, going in bags being sealed and, scanned and, x-rayed and all of that good stuff. VIP customer events, specific one-to-ones with editors so that we got all the event press talking about, the new products and things like that. Over, on shows can sometimes be difficult to see for the long term, but if you're tracking attribution, like I said, at a unit price of about 100 grand a pop, they didn't need to sell many and attribute those back to the stand. So I think at a bigger level where you've got big pieces of kit and product to show, I know Atlas Copco, who do a lot of oil and gas subsea stuff, do this sort of thing. They'll bring in huge pieces of kit. Some of the big companies can do that, and then they're looking for the payoff on that down the line. Smaller businesses, I think where we talked earlier in the session about smaller businesses maybe getting that shell scheme or that slightly larger space and filling it with display cabinets and having products all over the place. If you're gonna do that, really think sensitively about not doing too much and focus more on the scorecard type stuff, the singular product launch, and maybe the meet the expert stuff. By all means have some product around, but you don't need to take everything. I think this idea of kitchen sink. I typically go to manufacturing week at NEC, and you got Subcon and Main Tech and things and I know there'll be 200 stands, both of those shows, that are full of glass cabinets with loads of stuff they've made. And you almost can't get to the people, you can't get into the space because there's just so much piled high. But yeah, from an ROI perspective, I do absolutely think that new and exclusive thing works really well. And if you can get the space and the budget to display product and present it in a way that really draws people in at specific times with specific focus, that's going to be the way to, because you're delivering a great experience, then you're delivering something new and something exclusive at the show that people have to attend the show to experience and to see.
I was just about to ask you about, for marketers within manufacturers that are starting to take events more seriously, what's the one piece of advice you wish they understood from the start? I'm guessing you're going to say having that compelling reason to visit the stand, like we've discussed, where it's something exclusive or new. Is that right?
I think it's definitely up there. I think, that alludes to the strategy. So start with the end in mind. Think about, the space that we've got, the budget we've got, how many people we're going to bring, what's that singular focus, and then absolutely build around that. But it's got to be, a lot of people approach trade shows like, Field of Dreams, for the younger people in the community. It was a Kevin Costner film about, building a baseball field, and if you build it, they will come, was the famous line. But and a lot of companies do that. They just take everything along and throw it in the space and hope for the best. And I think that if you can flip the switch on that and be a bit more specific and strategic, intentional and focused, and also at the same time rooted into what we think is either missing from the industry or something that we know will add value to a number of the people that are attending, that's the trade show nirvana, isn't it? I think if we can pull all those things together. You're right. Ultimately, you're going to a pop-up event for 3 days. It's a marketplace like these things we have in all these market towns now around the UK every month. You got to rock up, and how are you going to stand out and have more people come, or more of the right people come to you than anything else? I think it's about really anchoring it in, what can we offer? How can we help? How can we transform, the businesses that we work with, and really, really lean into that.
Great. I think there's some really, really good snippets and strategy advice there on trade shows and how to approach the whole process during, how to get people to the stand, and the follow-up after. Thanks, René. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this and
great.
Do this mastermind on trade shows.
Yeah.
Where can, if someone wants to contact you, where can they go? Where's the best place to get in touch?
Well, I'm obviously a member of the community, and also probably the social media I generally hang out on the most is LinkedIn. So I'm easy to find. It's René Power. Everywhere you'll see either the purple glasses or a purple background behind me because the brand's all purple. But yeah, happy to connect with anybody who wants to connect. And, if I can help any of you with this, then great. Equally, working in tandem with Elliot to make sure that, everybody's well covered and well catered for. But yeah, easy to find.
Perfect. Thanks, René. Really appreciate it.
No problem. See you again. Speak soon. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.